This is Healthier Humans, episode 4.
Season 2.
Season 2. If you are watching this on YouTube, we are wearing the same clothes.
Okay.
We're gonna go a little bit more freestyle, hey?
Yep.
Not too structured. We've got a bit of an idea.
Yeah.
What we've been up to.
Mhm. I think one of the things I wanted to chat about is just like going back to basics. Do you want to give the backstory on maybe
What I just spoke about with the journal? Yeah. I was recently gifted a hard-copied version of the CrossFit Level 1 Trainer Manual, which is really cool.
Which I'm so jealous of, because I didn't even know you could get a hard copy version.
Thank you so much for that, Warren.
Printed them all out.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I was saying to Warren when he gave it to me. It's like, oh, man, like, you know, you just had to print it out, get it bound, and it's just, this is so pretty. And it's sort of a little bit updated. It says it's edition 2, so it's maybe changed slightly, but...
Were there new articles in it?
I'm not sure. If you don't know what the CrossFit Level 1 Trainer Manual is, basically to do the CrossFit certification, there's an accompanying text, which this is it. You kind of read up on it, and then you go and do the weekend course and take the test and whatnot. But the manual is made up of essentially articles that have been written that were posted on the CrossFit Journal. If you don't know what the CrossFit Journal is, just an online journal, sort of like a medical journal, I guess, but for the CrossFit world. And so Greg Glassman, the founder of CrossFit, predominantly Greg Glassman, I guess a lot of people have contributed to it over the years.
But mostly him in the beginning.
But it's all his theory system, whatever, spanning, sort of starting from 2001ish onwards. So just the methodology of CrossFit, their sort of take or beliefs on nutrition, movement, prescription, just everything to do with CrossFit.
But CrossFit is not paleo, if you weren't aware.
CrossFit is not paleo?
It's zone. It's not paleo.
Well, it's kind of zoned paleo, isn't it?
No, not necessarily.
Meat, vegetables,
rice,
nuts and seeds, little starch, no sugar? Yeah. So I was just telling Robin this.
We won't go on that tangent, sorry.
You really threw me off there. I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
But I started browsing through it over the last few nights, and it got me really excited because it took me back to a place in my head for when I first started getting into CrossFit, which was sort of 2012, just 2012ish, and all of the content in the manual and CrossFit as a program when it first was born was this fitness program to make you better at whatever it is that you do. It wasn't this is what you
sport in and of itself.
Exactly. And that's fine. It's a sport in and of itself, and that's fine. That's just a completely different conversation. But just got really excited because it talks a lot about CrossFit is basically a tool to prevent chronic illness, death, misery, all these things, and it's just stuff that I'm a lot more passionate about than wanting to compete. They talk about everyone is an athlete. Maybe not everyone should be competing, but everyone should be an athlete, or at least view themselves as an athlete. And athletes have better health outcomes. All the markers that you can track, all your blood markers and all the rest of it. Athletes typically do better in than non-athletes. So that's what I said to you before, and then we're just gonna kind of take that idea into...
And I think it's probably a really good perspective to have just with life in general, whether it's a sporting kind of connotation or leadership or family or anything else, but just always going back to the basics. I picked up this beautiful little book. It's called The Life Plan. It's written by this life coach, but I'm like, oh, I totally relate to her story. She was like overachiever, went until she like burnt out completely, had a really bad chronic fatigue for could hardly do anything for a year. That wasn't my story, but the hitting that point of burnout, which I've hit a couple times because I go and go and go and go. And what I love was she was really just go back to the basics, go back to simplify everything. What do you value? right? What are just like the things that are important to you? And that's kind of what I was thinking about when you're talking about going back to level 1, is I love, and that was what I fell in love with CrossFit in the first place, was the philosophy and just like how holistic it actually was. Like it wasn't sporting specific, it was that wellness is a continuum, you know, and I loved that. And then when you read it and you understand like the theory behind everything, it makes a lot of sense. And probably one of my favorite fundamentals from CrossFit is mechanics, consistency, intensity. And that idea that like you have to get the mechanics of a movement pretty solid, you need to practice it consistently, be training consistently, and then you add intensity. And I know CrossFit gets a bad rap because people are like, oh, it's extreme, or you get injured, or all these things. And I'm like, only if you really, only when you're messing around with like the fundamental principles and you're trying to add intensity before you have good mechanics or consistency. And yeah, it just is so beautiful to bring it back to the elements of what it was designed to be, and to always go back to those things. And the other thing you mentioned was, yeah, I had the privilege, the honor of running a shoulder workshop for some awesome people, and that's what I started with. I just started with the basics, which is, do you understand, you know, core to extremity, and making sure, you know, what we need to think about first, because we're always so worried about, it's like everything, right? We're always so worried about like the externals and like the extraneous, like ends of range, the real fancy stuff. But if like the basis and like the core is not good, then of course anything you put on top of that is going to crumble pretty fast. So that's kind of how I structured the workshop, was to go from basic fundamentals, from, you know, midline stability, to then obviously creating torque and tension, and, you know, creating stability and further away from your center of mass. And then what was fun about it was giving people lots of opportunities to see the differences. So one thing that I've learned about coaching and training is, if you can create experiences for people to come to those conclusions themselves, and to have these little aha moments, it's actually so much more powerful in terms of a learning tool and a way to actually have information stick than it is to tell someone something. Whenever we're told things, we hardly remember anything. But when someone has created an experience or an opportunity for you to like do something, and you have that light bulb moment, that is so much more powerful.
So sort of giving them the chance to feel what it is that you want them to be doing, sort of thing. Here's what you were doing before, you know, this is how I want you to adjust, and this is what it feels like. And
and you give them like a little adjustment to make, and then they're like, oh. Like, it was fascinating. We worked a little bit on like an overhead squat, and I was like, well, just do it. Like, just go for it. Show me what you got. Like, whatever. And you kind of see what people do. And then it was like, okay, let's go back to the basics, and let's start making sure that like we're screwing our feet into the ground, and that we're tensioning the system like from the bottom up as well as from, you know, the top, and like making sure that there's good tension and torque like kind of through the shoulder. And it was amazing to see just that little bit of reminder, and then having people do it again, being really mindful of how they were starting. And what they ended up being able to actually do.
Different feeling, hey?
Totally different. You could just see people's faces were like, oh, you know, like, oh my gosh, like that actually just changed my squat right there. And so that's the kind of thing, is like when you can give people opportunities to have experiences, so that it's, I always mix up the two. One's like deductive versus inductive reasoning and learning. Anyways, when the epiphany comes from you, from your own experience versus from the outside in, way more powerful. So it was really fun.
It's the same with cues as well, I think. Rather than me standing here and telling you to vertical shin, or whatever it is, if I just place a bench in front of your shins so that you can physically feel that your shins aren't moving forward, and I forget the term, like an internal cue or like a whatever it is, but it's the same thing essentially, is you're discovering this feeling or this certain way of doing something from your own, internally from your own, rather than me just saying over and over.
And I think that when you were saying that, it just made me think of like, you know, when you watch kids, like they just play with things and they figure stuff out. And I think we're, for whatever reason, we're like, just tell me, I just need to be better. Like, it's more like efficiency versus like experiential learning. And sometimes just because of like class structure or time restraints, whatever. But what I was thinking was, it's actually what I loved about CrossFit was that it felt like play for me, just to play around with different movements, get into different positions, see what happened if you did this versus that. Like, the reason I liked it, because it was really fun, and it felt exploratory versus just, like, prescribed, I guess.
Sure. I mean, what's the best way to learn how to climb a tree? It's probably climbing a tree, right?
Yeah.
Can't tell you
Try
how
it
to
out.
climb a tree. You have to fall out of the tree first until you figure out how to climb a tree.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So what other thoughts did you have, like, kind of coming out of that little
The CrossFit Level 1
yeah.
manual? No, it just got me excited. Again, we sort of spoke last episode maybe about, or the one before, sorry, about us both having kind of got out of that realm a wee bit and doing other things. So it was just really nice to rediscover all the good memories that I have from when I was, first sort of got into it as a training program and doing fun stuff.
And then, so what do you think, maybe just being reminded of some of the, like, core, fundamental, great pieces of it. Like, is there anything that you picked up on that you're like, oh, actually,
like I'd let this
I
slip?
forgot that. Yeah, maybe I should bring that back into my current practices.
The emphasis on work capacity.
Yeah.
If you don't know what that means, it means cardio, pretty much. Well, not specifically, but I guess CrossFit sort of talks about, they wouldn't trade the ability to have this high level of work capacity for any other attribute of fitness. So they wouldn't bias just getting strong or just getting flexible over the ability to actually just do work. So meaning having this big cardiovascular, aerobic, anaerobic base, and obviously strength and flexibility and all that plays a role in it, because you have to have those other attributes to be able to perform the work. But that is the main premise, is actually just doing the work, or having the capacity to do a lot of work. That's sort of what the program is based off.
Yeah, totally. Which is beautiful when you think about, like, again, that wellness continuum.
Yeah.
And it's just like, can you live your life?
Yeah. Well, and that's it. And that's, I think...
Can you do the stuff you want to do?
Exactly.
Right?
If you frame it that way, if you only ever look at it like, to win this competition, I've got to do all of this, be able to do all of this work. But if you look at it on that continuum, as a human being, because the thing is, why do people end up in rest homes, and why do people get stuck and lose the ability to get out of a chair? They've lost the capacity to do that work.
Yeah.
So it just made me want to put more effort into metabolic conditioning, the work capacity, that stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
So that was nice.
That's cool.
What else?
Do you, have you still got your level 1?
No, it's expired. Yeah, 2017. About this time 2 years ago, yeah.
Did you ever consider doing level 2 or beyond?
Well, when I first did the level 1, that wasn't a thing, I don't think. I think it wasn't until a year or two after that they brought out
Level 2.
all the different levels. But no.
I think the things that I'd be interested in now are more like the art of breath, like the CrossFit endurance stuff. I'd love to do like Unbreakable Runner or like the running course. That's actually what I'd really like to do. And then, the art of breath, which I know we'll probably talk about at another stage, go back to all the value of breath work. Because that's, kind of tied into that, like, work capacity is, a lot of that has to do with cardiovascular and, like, your lung capacity and, just ability to translate force and a whole bunch of different things. But, we'll get into that in another conversation potentially, because that's been my big passion lately is breath work.
No, that's one thing that I thought about while browsing back through it, is definitely the breathing side of it, and that's because I've also been putting a little bit of emphasis on the breathing with the other content I've been reading and stuff. I played it through my head. I was like, all right, if I was to get back into CrossFit, how would I approach it? I would do the program, but really let my ability to breathe well govern my output. So essentially meaning I'm only going to push as hard as I can, or only going to, and when I start to breathe poorly or get out of breath, or that's going to govern my output. So I'm going to stick at a pace in a workout where I'm in control of my breath.
Yeah.
Because that's something that they don't necessarily, well, at least unless I haven't come across it, but it doesn't seem to be much of an emphasis.
Depends. Yeah. Like I think to me
Within
that
CrossFit?
that goes hand in hand with the understanding the difference between like practice, training, and competition.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And the same thing for them, that you could look at that as, all right, that breathing mechanics, I'm going to learn that, practice it consistently, and then add the intensity. Well, that's exactly what I've just said, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I've never come across any content in the CrossFit world where they've straight up talked about breathing, the technical aspect of breathing. How are you breathing? Are you breathing through your nose, through your mouth? That's the next thing. And are you letting that govern how hard you're pushing in the workout? I could be wrong, because I could have just not come across it.
I don't know. It just makes me think of when Ben Bergeron talks about like the difference and the value of making sure that we have a high percentage of training, which is more about, working at like 70%.
Yep.
So in your everyday workout, you're not competing, right? You're training.
Skill-based training.
So practice.
Oh, that's practice, sorry.
Skill-based
Training,
is
yes,
like practice stuff, like working on rope climbs and like foot positioning and blah, blah, blah. But like training is like basically just training.
Really intent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like again, working at most of the time, like 70-ish %.
Yeah.
And rather than this whole thing which you see so often, which is people like start out like blitzing stuff and they like have nothing left for the end of the workout. And when you're training, the idea is that you're working at like 70% of your max capacity for the majority of the workout, and then just ramping it up in like the final 20%. Or like the final round or whatever it is.
Not,
so you should, but most of the time it's like maintaining a relatively like training state versus trying to max it every time. Like that's not the point. The point is that we're training, we're not competing.
Yeah.
And we'll only really get into max effort stuff most of the time when we're competing or when we're testing or we're doing 1RM stuff. So yeah, that's probably the way that I think about it is, well, when you're working at 70%, like your breath is very different than when you're like giving it your all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I guess what I was meaning is, there's 101 articles and books on squatting technique. But I haven't come across an article on the actual mechanics of breathing.
I don't know.
Regardless of that relative intensity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely look it up.
That's why I want to do the Art of Breath course.
No, totally.
Because I think they probably do talk some about that.
Well, I think it's all about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've looked at, definitely we live in New Zealand. People don't come down here lots to run seminars and that, but...
No, I think they held it in Auckland once that I saw, maybe 2-3 years ago.
But they have an online course, which I do, Art of Breath.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they have an online course, and so does Functional Movement Systems. They have a functional breathing online course too. Yeah.
Nice.
I'll try to do that.
Yeah.
Spending more money.
Yeah, that's right. Now, are you currently registered for any courses, or like you just finished the lymphatic drainage not too long ago?
Oh yeah.
Are you doing anything else coming up, or are you just going to work with?
No, the Oxygen Advantage program that I spoke about last episode, or the other episode, they have an online course, but also an option to do like a 2-hour kind of Skype session with the guy that wrote the book.
Cool.
So I might try and do that. It's 4 p.m. Ireland time, which is 3 a.m. New Zealand time, so that'll be great.
Awesome.
But no, there's always more ongoing study that you get excited about, but it's just making it happen, I suppose. Prioritising it or saving money for it, or
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else was on my list. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have any like fitness courses coming up, but I did just register for Dare to Lead, which is like Brené Brown's like leadership program.
Yep.
I'm quite excited about that.
Yeah,
they're running it here in Christchurch in July. Which I'm pumped about. It's gonna be amazing.
One thing I've sort of thought about with the ongoing study stuff is I like buying the book, because then I can kind of get the gist of the concept of the the program or the modality or the whatever it is,
Mm.
I try not to get too sucked in. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like I try and understand it and then just incorporate it rather than, we spoke about this in different forms in different episodes, but
Yeah.
rather than me doing this, say if it's within the massage therapy thing, you know, this technique, and then I only ever use this technique, and then
It's so easy to
it's,
just get so one-track minded or kind of like
Yeah.
tunnel visioned as
Yeah.
you do different things.
I just try and think of myself as a filter and chuck as much information into it as I can, and then somehow mold it into my own
A system that works
my
for
own
you.
system, my own
Yeah.
that sort of
Yeah. That takes a lot of ownership
does.
and a lot of thinking.
It does. I don't feel like it does because I think I'm just used to it.
Yeah.
But I think to initially to start that cascade and that process, it does.
Yeah.
It takes consciousness.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when I was putting together the content for the shoulder stuff, I pulled out Supple Leopard, and it was probably the first time that I've cracked that book open in a while. But I was rereading stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I forgot like how good this stuff is, like how just clear it is, and just how much sense it all makes. And I really wish that Supple Leopard had been like one of our physiotherapy textbooks. I just think that would have made a world of difference. It probably still would now.
Yeah.
Although New Zealand's got some pretty good practitioners. I've noticed that. I feel like there's a really good quality of physiotherapy practice here.
Sure.
And different than in maybe in other parts of the world. But that's just a very like integrated approach and very, I don't know, just very systematic, holistic, looking at whole systems of things, looking at the mechanics of things. Like, man, that would have changed a lot of people's practice, I think, if that was a part of the curriculum.
Supple Leopard was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's like the integrate, like that bringing it all together piece.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at all the bits and pieces.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
That's one thing I do like about Kelly's theory. If you've noticed some of his videos and that when he talks, he directly references the person that he's got that he learned from in school, or like he'll talk about like say anatomy trains or someone else, and then how it fits in with. So it's not just like this is what I was taught, this is my thinking, and this is the way it is. He sort of does piece a lot of different stuff together to put it in, which is cool.
It is
Cool
awesome.
way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a real skill set, is to like be able to like piece things together for people.
Yeah.
That's kind of what you were talking about as well, is like taking in a whole lot of information, but then kind of working it into a system or a framework that actually like you feel empowered by versus overwhelmed by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would give you one little example. You were speaking, lots of things that to tie together. You were talking about with your shoulder workshop and being able to create tension and core to extremity and so on before you do the fancy stuff. I had someone on the massage table recently, I think it was a shoulder complaint, spent an hour massaging the shoulder, got off the table, it feels okay, it feels a little bit better. And then I was like, alright, so just show me exactly how you move when you do this thing. And then I was like, alright, let's try, just give me a little bit of a squeeze between your shoulder blades, like just create a little bit of tension in the core before you worry about how your shoulder joint and your elbow joint and your arm is moving. And she did that, and then she moved, and she's like, that's like 100% better. And I just spent, and it took like 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes. And I just spent an hour like working away.
Yeah.
But this is the whole premise of Supple Leopard as well, is movement first, like you've got to clean up the way you're moving before you try and clean up the symptoms of that or whatever else, so. And
just knowing that like working on technique or that motor control piece, like do that first before you really worry about like truly having to mobilize. Like in depth, right? Is like, well, sort your mechanics, see if it changes there, and then if it doesn't, fantastic. Then you know you actually have a legit mobility restriction versus a motor control problem.
Exactly.
So that's the stuff that I was trying to help people understand is just like, hey, like if you focus on these things first and it fixes, quote unquote, the issue, well then it's not a mobility issue.
No.
But again, it's I think where we get a little bit lazy and we're like, struggle with my overhead, must have tight pecs or must have tight lats or whatever. instead of thinking like, oh, do I struggle with overhead? Actually, maybe because of how I'm recruiting.
Yep.
You know, and which things are moving first, and if I'm even set up in a good position.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's always going back to looking at big picture, kind of macro first, and then breaking it down into micro, but making sure things are moving well, like on a foundational and fundamental level. So yeah, just kind of that idea of going back to the basics, being really clear about, you know, again, clear systems, clear mechanics, consistency, intensity, because that applies to so many things, which I've found and loved and used in so many different examples. It doesn't matter what it is that you're trying to get better at, it's always
It's just
those
how you learn
things.
the skill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's how you learn skills, period.
Yeah.
So